play and call it work. MiniWarGaming's Warhammer 40k Battle Reports!
Hey everybody, our Indiegogo fundraising campaign for our new RPG show, Blue Collar Heresy, is live until the end of November. Go check it out at miniwargaming.com/blue and help us make it a reality. Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and welcome to the new Tyranid Codex review by MiniWarGaming. I'm very excited for this, and I have to say, just right off the bat, that I am quite happy about this codex. It contains a lot of fun stuff, a lot of cool modifications, and some surprises to things that they decided to buff or nerf, which I was not expecting. So in this review video, I am going to actually try to go over everything, so this could be a little long. So if you're painting miniatures, don't worry about looking too much, because I'm just going to be talking as I read through the book. I've actually gone through and I've made notes on every single page of things that have changed from the index to the new Tyranid Codex. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. So if you're brand new to Tyranids, well, you can still get a lot out of this, but I'm really going to be focusing on what's changed since the 8th edition index is dropped and compare it to what's here. And then of course we'll talk about the new stuff too, like the stratagems, warlord traits, psychic powers, and all of that. So let's get started. And of course, don't forget that we will have a battle report in the MiniWarGaming Vault at the link below. That'll be Ultramarines versus Tyranids. I will be playing against Quirk. We actually already did the game. That way I could get my head into the review a lot more, because it's one thing to look at it and just do math hammer. It's another thing to actually experience it. It was a lot of fun. It was a very interesting battle report, so you go check it out. If you're not a Vault member, you can still click it, get a free 7-day trial, get instant access to that and watch it, and everything else that's in the Vault. So, the very first thing, and I was surprised by this, that changed is how synapse works. So synapse before, in 8th edition, 7th edition it was a little different, but in 8th edition it was reduced to an 8-inch bubble, which I thought was peculiar but interesting. And then at 8-inch bubble, you automatically pass morale tests, so you didn't fail them, you could not, so you would not break or fail morale tests. And on top of that, there's a special rule called instinctive behavior, which they super simplified in 8th edition compared to 7th, which I'm grateful for, because I didn't like all the tables that 7th edition offered. Even though it kind of gave you more granularity to it, it was more of a pain, because it didn't happen often enough for Tyranid players for you to memorize it really well, because most of the time your guys were in synapse, otherwise you were in trouble. And now instinctive behavior is simply, in 8th edition when it first came out, that you had to shoot at the nearest thing and you had to charge the nearest thing. Well, now they've changed what instinctive behavior is. It is that they actually have to subtract 1 from their hit rolls when they shoot if they don't target the nearest thing. And they have to subtract 2 from their charge rolls if they don't charge the nearest thing. And that includes if you multi-charge, well then you did not charge the nearest thing. Or actually, if it declares a charge against any unit other than the nearest enemy unit. That's an important distinction. So multi-charge, you'll still get that -2. That is if you are not within 24 inches of a synapse creature. And that's strange because now we have 2 synapse bubbles. We have a 12-inch bubble around a synapse creature, which is automatically pass morale tests. And then we have a 24-inch bubble around them, which is basically don't worry about instinctive behavior. And I really like that, because I found that if I had artillery in the back, like Biovores or an Exocrine or Hive Guard, which they've buffed the range of, which I really like, that they need to be babysat by some expensive synapse creature like a Zoanthropes or Tyranid Warriors or something like that. And I'm not the kind of player who likes to sit back with my army, but there are certain units that want to stand still. Exocrines excel at standing still. Hive Guard with their heavy weapons and Biovores with their heavy weapons want to stand still as well. And so it was always kind of a pain. But with that 24-inch range, now you're pretty much, as long as you have a synapse creature on the table, most likely you have that covered. And you could even consider not having synapse at all if you only want to be shooting and charging at the nearest thing, or take the penalty otherwise, but I wouldn't do that. So that's a big change. Shadow on the Warp is also a longer range now. It's simply a -1 to enemy psychers psychic tests, which is huge. It's now 18 inches, which is awesome, because if they're in smite range of your synapse creatures, then they are at that -1, and that makes a big difference. All of a sudden, Smite only does D6 wounds, mortal wounds, if you roll double 6, which is a Perils, because that becomes 11, and they have to get a 6 to manifest it. And if they're within 18 inches of any of your Psychers, that means they're also within Deny the Witch range, and so it makes it basically that much easier for you to deny whatever they rolled. So, very powerful. It does not work against Tyranid Psychers. It doesn't say friendly Tyranid Psychers, it just says Tyranid Psychers. So Tyranids versus Tyranids will not be affected. And I think Although I haven't actually looked this up, that the Genestealer Cult Psychers have the Tyranid keyword as well. I'm pretty sure they do, which means that you won't affect Genestealer Cult Psychers either. So that was the big overall change. Of course, they introduced the hive fleets like they have, and I really like this, with all the different codexes. Space Marines have their chapter tactics, Imperial Guard have their regiments, Eldar have their craft worlds, and so on and so forth. And now Tyrannid Swarms have their hive fleets, which are really neat. And it's the same kind of rules that you can be from a hive fleet, or you can be a splinter fleet of that hive fleet. And so you can kind of play around with the different ones. The weapons have changed a bit too. The big changes are Devourers with Brain Leech Worms are now Assault 6 instead of Assault 3. And I thought right from the beginning they should have been Assault 6, because in 7th edition they were 3 shots twin linked. And so you would, or sorry, they were 6 shots twin linked, and then they became 2 3 shots rather than 2 6 shots. Pretty much everything in 7th edition that was twin linked became twin in 8th edition, which meant to get twice as many shots. So if you had a twin linked bolter, it became twin bolters, which was the profile of just 2 bolters put together. But for some reason, the twin linked Devourers with Brain Leech Worms, which in 7th edition were 6 shots twin linked, and twin linked back then, if you're not familiar with 7th edition, meant you got to reroll failed hit rolls, became 3 shots times 2 rather than 6 shots times 2. Well, now I think they corrected it because it seems like it was an oversight. They're back up to 6 shots, which means Doc Effexes and Doc Tyrants are back, baby. That's right. 4 Devourers with Brain Leech Worms on a Carnifex gives them 24 shots. And as you'll find out, there's even a way to enhance the ballistic skill of a Carnifex, which is all awesome. And the Doc Effexes, or Doc Tyrants as well. Flying Hive Tyrants, essentially, with 4 Devourers, get their 24 shots. The Death Spitters, the new Strength 7 Death Spitter with the Slimer Maggots does not become 6 shots. Otherwise, that would become the ultimate weapon of ultimateness. Strength 7 -1. It stayed at 3 shots. Venom Cannons got a buff too. Heavy Venom Cannons went from D3 wounds to 3, and Venom Cannons went from 1 wound or 1 damage to D3. So they got a nice buff there. And we'll go over any other changes there. But let's just jump right into the various units. Now, I'm not going to talk about points cost right now because I don't have that right in front of me. I'm just going to talk about if there are changes to stats. The Broodlord, for example, has no change. The Hive Tyrant had a couple really important changes. At least I think they're important. That is, first off, he went from 10 wounds to 12 wounds. So 10 wounds is the point where you can target a character anyways. So it kind of sucked. So now he's up to 12 wounds. And that does 2 things. One, obviously it gives him 2 more wounds, but it also means you have to take out more wounds before he's injured. Because now you got to get him down to 6 wounds out of 12 rather than 5 out of 10. And so you've got to get through 6 wounds rather than 5 before he's even hurt, which is pretty fantastic. For some reason, they dropped his attacks from 5 to 4. I'm not sure what their reasoning. I don't think that's a big deal. It would be nice to have that extra attack. Maybe it's because the prehensile pincer tail gets an extra attack on its own, and maybe they thought that, oh, that was supposed to be one of the 5 attacks. But the same thing happened to Swarmlord. He lost an attack, but I'm not sure why. The synapse range of the Hive Tyrant is actually 18 inches instead of 12, which is nice. So they lengthened that. Basically in the indexes, it was 12 instead of 8. Now it's 18 instead of 12. And it has a 4-up invuln instead of 5-up. I'm not sure how I feel about that. It's great for Hive Tyrants, but at the same time, I don't like invulns too much in 8th edition. I feel that it kind of upsets the balance of the game too much, because Last Cannon should be good at taking out a Hive Tyrant, but now they're not, because there's a 50-50 chance that you just negate that 1 shot, which becomes D6 damage. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of invulnerable saves, so that's kind of where I'm coming there, but it is nice to see the Hive Tyrant get a buff. Before, it was just the fact that he got a 5-up invuln was a pretty big deal because he didn't have one in 7th edition. And if you give him wings, he can now deep strike. You can put him in reinforcements and he can swoop down. They call it swooping assault. Works exactly the same way as 99% of reinforcements out there. You can place him at the end of the movement phase, more than 9 inches away from any enemies. That's pretty cool. Very good utility there. He can jump in the backfields, or he could just be placed safely in swooping assault and not be able to get shot down first turn. And just very, very good utility there. The Swarmlord, his named character buddy, had a couple changes. The attacks went down by 1, and his invuln went from 5-up to 4-up, and it becomes 3-up, of course, in close combat. His synapse went up to 18 from 12. All the same things pretty much as the Hive Tyrant. The other thing that changed is interesting is his Bone Sabers. Before they were D6 damage, now they're 3. On average, that means that they're not as good. But if you ask Steve, he likes 3 better than D6 because it's dependable. It's just like this. It's going to do 3 damage, and you know it's going to do 3 damage. Whereas when you roll a D6, it could do 6, or it could do 1. But I know logically and statistically, 3 is worse than D6, because on average D6 is a 3.5. But at the same time, I do get that it's nice to have that just kind of, this is where it is. They also added an ability that if you do a wound roll of 6+ for it, they actually take a mortal wound in addition to any other damage. So when he swings in, he can actually inflict mortal wounds as well, which is pretty cool. So that kind of brings up the average number of wounds that the Bone Saber will inflict by 1/6. Not quite back up to 3.5, but it's a mortal wound, so it'll bypass pretty much everything. And that's it for the Swarm Lord. He still has his ability to let people move in the shooting phase, and they can still charge after that, so that's pretty awesome. The Tyranid Prime didn't change. The Termagant changed a tiny bit, and that is that at the start of his movement phase, he spawns Termagants, not at the end. That is actually a pretty big difference, because before you could move up 8 inches and then drop Termagants out 6 inches. So that's a 14-inch plus their shooting range of 12 or charging or whatever. The other thing is, this is reminiscent of an older edition of Tyranids where the Termagants did spawn before they moved. And one thing I found there is it was really hard to do so and find a good place for the Termagant to move. Because what do? Do you spawn the Termagants in front of the Termagant, and now he can't move where he needs to go? Or do you spawn him behind, let the Termagant go forward, but now the Gaunts are kind of out of position? What I found it was usually useful for was spawning the Gaunts behind him. At the same time, he could be, it's most of the time you're going to be using it to reinforce existing Gaunt squads, but it's still the same thing. They have to be placed within 6 inches of the Termagant and more than an inch away from enemies. And so that can be challenging for the Termagant to then find a place to move afterwards. But not a huge deal, and but it is a bit of a nerf to the Termagant, I would say. I know you could also look at it as a bit of a buff because now he can spawn them and then move away, whereas before now he has to move and then spawn. But I think overall that's a negative thing. We have a new HQ choice. The Neurothrope has been moved away from the Zoanthrope squads as an upgrade to his own HQ, which I love, because I love all these different HQs because, for example, the Broodlord in 8th edition being moved away from an upgrade for Gene Stealers to an HQ choice, because it means now I can create a Gene Stealer army. Well, now I can create a Zoanthrope army. The Neurothrope is super awesome in that he's basically a Zoanthrope stats with more wounds. He's got 5 wounds and all that kind of stuff. He's still just crap in close combat and doesn't really matter there. He doesn't get the Zoanthrope's ability, which we're going to see in a second, to cast Smite at 24 inches. But what he does get is he gets a Spirit Leech, which is whenever he casts Smite, for every model he slays, he can restore a wound to himself or other Zoanthropes within 6 inches. And on top of that, he has a 6-inch bubble for Zoanthropes, of which he is a Zoanthrope in the keywords, that they can reroll 1s when they're doing psychic tests. When you combine that with what the Zoanthropes can do, which we'll get into, it's pretty darn powerful because it is next to impossible to not cast Smite on a 5+. Because if you roll a 3 and a 1, well, re-roll the 1, you just need a 2+. Even if you roll a 2 and a 1, now you just need a 3+. It's not very hard to miss. You have to roll double 2 to not get any re-rolls whatsoever. So Smite, and on top of that, you could roll a 6 and a 1, like you got Smite off, now re-roll the 1 and try to roll a 5. It's just a much higher average that you're going to be rolling when you get to re-roll those 1s. So it's pretty powerful there that he gets used. And I love the fact that he's an HQ and he's 70 points. So he's not an expensive HQ. He's not the cheapest HQ in all of 8th edition. But for the Tyranids, that's not too expensive. So he's a cheap way to spam other detachments if that's what you're looking for. And it'll be interesting to see how that'll work out in tournament metas. Old One Eye had an enormous change. It doesn't sound big until you realize the implications. He was 10 wounds before, and now he is 9. You might think, well, that's a nerf, but it is a buff in every way except the fact that he dies 1 wound faster. It's a buff because a character who has 10 or more wounds can be targeted even if he's not the nearest. Now that Old One Eye has 9 wounds, he is still a character, which means he can't be targeted unless he's the nearest. This is huge because I found often when I'd bring him with 3 Carnifexes, he'd be kind of behind those 3 Carnifexes. They would just snipe him first because he was giving enormous buffs to them nearby. Now they can't do that. On top of that, that whole losing the profile of like once you're down to 5 wounds and now you're this bad, or now when you're down to 2 wounds you're this bad, he doesn't have that anymore. So he does not lose effectiveness the more wounds he takes. So I think in every way it's a buff because even though he'll be killed 1 wound faster, you're not going to be able to hit him as early and as easily as you could before. On top of that, his Immortal Battering Ram, the Carnifexes get this too, is when he charges in, he rolls a die on a 4+, he inflicts D3 mortal wounds to the unit within 1 inch. That was there before. In addition, add 1 to all hit rolls for Old One Eye in the fight phase if it charged in the same turn. Now he has a 3+ weapon skill. He has the same abilities before that Carnifexes within 6 inches get +1. He's a Carnifex, so he's really essentially always a 2+ weapon skill. So you might think, well, why do I care about the +1? But that's because of Crushing Claws. Crushing Claws are his strength 14, minus 3 AP, D3, damage 3, but he has to get -1 to his hit rolls, like Power Fists. So his 2+ will get the -1 from the Crushing Claws, but the +1 from charging. So on the charge, the only reason you would decide not to use Crushing Claws is if Scything Talons, because Scything Talons let you reroll 1s to hit. Because it was actually a hard choice when I would charge in, because he had the rule before, which has also changed, that he automatically gets more attacks for every hit that he does. When I'm using my Crushing Claws, I'm hitting on 3s, whereas I'm using my Scything Talons, I'm hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s, so it's basically everyone will be a hit. And now I don't have to worry about that as much, because Crushing Claws will be awesome. Having said that, Berserk Rampage has been nerfed. Before it was automatically get extra attacks. Now it's only when he rolls a hit roll of 6+. But notice that that'll always be a 5+, because he always gets +1 to his hit rolls. And when he charges, that 5+ will become a 4+. So they don't confer additional attacks, but it is a bit of a nerf. So he'll be basically on a 4+ or a 5+, be getting extra attacks. So Old One Eye is much better. Tyranid Warriors haven't changed. Gene Stealers have gained a ballistic skill of 4+, because now they can take flesh hooks, which is an interesting thing that I'll probably never take. They can also take Acid Maw. So it's like they're bringing back, it feels like, and you're going to see this throughout, that if the models had something to be modeled, they made rules for it. And you're going to see this a lot in the Carnifexes. And so Gene Stealers have it in their models that they can have Acid Maw and flesh hooks. I'm surprised they don't have they don't have anything for the feeder tendrils though, but maybe that you can just kind of count that as the Yum Girl upgrade, but Gene Stealers don't get that, so I'm not quite sure what it is. So for every 4 models in the unit, 1 can have flesh hooks, and or 1 model may have an Acid Maw. And they can actually take extended carapaces now, which makes them have a 4-up save instead of a 5-up. But they lose Swift and Deadly, which is what allows them to advance and charge. So I don't think I'll ever take it. I don't think it's worth having a 4-up armor when you consider that they have a 5-up invuln. So you're really not gaining much. And not most weapons, but a lot of weapons ignore at least 1 level of AP, so you're back to your 5-up invuln anyways. And you're losing the ability to advance and charge, which I think is one of their best features. They've also gained a new interesting rule called infestation. If your army includes any units of Gene Stealers, you can place up to 4 infestation nodes anywhere in your deployment zone when your army deploys. If an enemy ever comes within 9 inches of one of those nodes, it's destroyed. But basically, while there are any friendly infestation nodes in your battlefield, you can say that your Gene Stealers are lurking, so you can put them into reinforcements. And at the end of your movement phase, you can set it up wholly within 6 inches of a friendly infestation node. And then that infestation node gets removed. If it's lurking and all the infestation nodes are gone, then it's actually destroyed. So you got to be a little careful. It has some advantages there. It doesn't give you the same mobility and movement because you have to put them in your deployment. So you're going to be deploying them 6 inches out. Whereas if you started your Gene Stealers at the front of your deployment, they could move 8 plus an advance and still charge. It's a big difference. But it does mean that if you're not going first, that they'll be protected. But you do have to be careful because, like, if you have 4 infestation nodes and you have 4 Gene Stealers lurking, the moment a unit comes within 9 inches of one of them, then you're not going to be able to get all 4 of your Gene Stealer units out there because there's only 3 left and they disappear when you actually come out from lurking them. So it's an interesting thing. I don't know how powerful it'll be. I'm going to try it out. I haven't yet, but it does give them a little more flavor. The termagants haven't really changed except that they removed the strangle webs and the spike rifles, probably because there's no models for it. But you could probably use the old FAQ that, well, if it's in the index and if I have models that have that model, then I could still use the index one. But you'll never see them, and I've never used them and never will. Hormagaunts haven't changed. Ripper Swarms have not changed. Tyrant Guards, only a little change. They went from 2 attacks to 3. But when you consider you usually bring them in 3s, actually you do bring them in 3s, up to 6, that's 3 extra attacks from this Tyrant Guard who can usually have their Crushing Claws or their Rending Claws or Lash Whips and Bone Swords. They're pretty powerful. So that's a little buff, not huge, but it's nice. Hive Guard did not change. Even their weapons lictors didn't change. The Death Leaper got really nerfed, which is okay. He had a rule, it's after me, which you put him in reinforcements. You choose one of the enemy's HQ choices, or one of their characters, I think it was. And when he arrives from reinforcements, he has to be placed within 6 inches of that character, but more than an inch away from enemies. So if that character was not bubble wrapped, you can basically put the Death Leaper an inch and a quarter away and be like, hey, I'm here. And he'd charge in and usually kill the character. Now, it's after me, is at the start of the first battle round, but before the first turn begins, pick a character from the opposing army. You can re-roll hit and wound rolls in the fight phase for any of Death Leaper's attacks that target the character. Because he just has the hidden hunter rule of the lictors where he just gets placed 9 inches away and can re-roll failed charges. So its After Me was nerfed significantly. It's actually pretty much something totally different now. So rerolling hit rolls and wound rolls against one specific character. I would have liked that to have been just against characters in general because it seems a little too specific. But whatever. He's kind of just a fun, flavorful character anyways. Zoanthropes have had some significant changes. And that is that when they cast Smite, when they manifest Smite, it actually affects the closest visible enemy unit within 24 inches instead of 18. That is a huge difference. I hope you realize the implications of Smite, which you can spam, being able to be cast at 24 inches. And on top of that, this was there before. If there's at least 4 Zoanthropes in the group, they do D3 extra mortal wounds when they manifest Smite. But if there's 6 of them, and this is new, they manifest 3 automatic wounds. So if you max out the squad, then your average Smite will be doing 3 plus D3. And if you get lucky, it would be 3 plus D6. And with a Neurothrope nearby, rerolling 1s, oh, it's gross. Absolutely gross. So other than that, they haven't changed. They're still as awesome as they were before. The Maliceptor is interesting. They give him a buff. His invuln went from 5 plus to 4 plus. Once again, you know my opinion on that, but it's cool. And now he can manifest 2 psychic powers instead of just 1. So they buffed him in that area. But other than that, he has not changed. Venomthropes are interesting. They went from, both their shooting and melee toxic weapons went from 1 damage to D3 damage. So interesting. They weren't really big into close combat to begin with. Like, they do have poisonous attacks and stuff, but you didn't usually bring them for that. The big change for Venomthropes, though, is their Shrouded Bubble. Before, it was a 3-inch bubble that only affected infantry and not monsters. Now, your opponent must subtract 1 from hit rolls made for ranged weapons that target the same Hive Fleet units, excluding monsters, while they're within 6 inches of any Venomthropes. In addition, your opponent must subtract 1 from hit rolls made for ranged weapons that target monsters while they're within 6 inches if the unit contains at least 3 or more models, which is what their starting range is. So I have a 6-inch bubble that includes monsters if there's at least 3 Venomthropes, which is what they start with, is 3 Venomthropes. So your opponent's going to want to kill one of those to stop helping monsters. But if you bring your Venomthrope unit to a full 6 Venomthrope unit, that 6-inch bubble becomes a 9-inch bubble. And there's also 6 Venomthropes, so you can spread them out, and you have this enormous -1 bubble. So eat your heart out, Raven Guard, and Harlequins, and Eldar stuff, and the list goes on about who can modify that. So it's pretty cool. Venomthropes definitely got a buff overall. They do more damage, and their cloud has been increased to 6 inches instead of 3, and it can affect monsters if you have enough Venomthropes. Pyrovores went up to strength 5 base, but before their Acid Maw, which was their melee weapon, was just a regular strength 5, so it doesn't actually change anything. Unless you decide you don't want to use the Acid Maw and you want to use just a basic close combat attack, then it's just strength 5. So really they haven't changed. The Haruspex went up. He didn't change except for one interesting thing, and that is that his damage chart, you have to get him down to 7 wounds instead of 8. It's just his damage chart's changed a little bit. It used to be 8 to 13. Like you have to get him down to 6 wounds instead of 7 before he degrades in his capabilities. So not a big deal. Gargoyles gain Sweeping Assault, which is like the Hive Tyrant gained. They can go into reinforcements and come on the table 9 inches away. So that's cool. That's a pretty big difference. Gargoyles all of a sudden having that. Raveners didn't change. The Red Terror was a 2+ weapon skill. Now he's a 3+ weapon skill, but he already gets to add 1 to hit rolls for Ravener units, and he is 1, so he's kind of already a 2+. And he doesn't have anything that gives him -to hit, so it only matters if the opponent has something that gives him -to hit. Mucilid spores have not changed. Spore mines, you can bring more of them now in a group, but other than that, they haven't changed. Exocrines haven't changed. They're still super awesome. Tyrannofex has had some interesting changes. Their Acid Spray, so the 18-inch heavy D6, strength 7, -1 AP, D3 damage that automatically hits, is now heavy 2d6. They doubled the number of shots that it is. And the Rupture Cannon, which was 2 shots, at strength 10, -1 AP, 2 damage, is now 3 shots, strength 10, -3 AP, D6 damage, which going from 2 to D6 is definitely a buff. 3 to D6, yeah, you can kind of argue that's not, but going from 2 to 3.5, that's almost doubling its effectiveness. And on top of that, it's getting 50% more shots, and it's ignoring 2 extra levels of armor. That's huge. That is absolutely huge. Stinger Salvo went up to 24 inches from 18 as well. And it still has the ability to shoot twice if it doesn't move. So the fact that it's getting 2d6 shots with the Acid Spray now becomes 4d6 shots, and that heavy 3 becomes 6, that just multiplies as it does as it does all of that. And it doesn't suffer penalties for moving and firing heavy weapons too, so really, really good. So Tyranid has definitely got a huge buff. Oh, and in close combat, they're now AP -2 rather than AP -1. A small change there, but that can make a big difference. Biovores didn't change. Toxic Rains overall didn't change, but their massive toxic lashes, which are shooting and melee, both went from -1 AP to -2. So interesting little changes here. I wonder what their thoughts are. Now let's talk about the big change of the Tyranid army, and that is Carnifexes. I've already talked about a lot of big changes, and all these little small changes add up to big ones. But the Carnifexes is probably the biggest area. They've actually included 3 different profiles for Carnifexes. We have Carnifexes, Screamer Killers, and Thornbacks. Essentially, in a Carnifex kit, in the plastic kit, this has been forever since I've been playing Warhammer for the past 10 years. They have a lot of different head choices. They have heads with these like big antennas. They've got heads with these like tusks. They've got heads with like this big tongue coming out with like this goop coming off of it. They got the head with side of it blown off. And when I first got into Tyranids, all those heads actually represented different things. The one with the antennas gave him +1 ballistic skill. The one with the side blown off gave him regeneration. There was the acid one. There was the tusks that gave them +2 attacks on the charge instead of +1, which was the way it worked before. They've basically brought that back. And on top of that, the back plate right here for the Carnifex, there was 3 or 4 different options, and they did different things before, and then in the 8th edition and 7th edition, they stopped doing anything, and now they brought that back. So there's a lot more options for Carnifexes. Like, for example, give him the enhanced senses, and he gets +1 ballistic skill. Then give him the 24 shots from the 4 Devours with Brain Leech Worms, and all of a sudden you're firing 24 shots. They're assault weapons, by the way, 18-inch range, and they hit on 3s. And since they're assault weapons, he could advance and then hit on 4s instead. And they're all strength 6. AP nothing, 1 damage, but still, that is a lot of firepower. You can also give him Chitin Thorns. So if these basically these extra little bits that they come in the thing where you can put them on the side of the Carnifex that have these like thorns on the side. And then if at the end of the fight phase, roll a d6 for each enemy unit within an inch of any models with Chitin Thorns. On a 6, that unit takes a mortal wound. So it's like this little extra thing where if you're in close combat with it, it's just like, and it knocks you back. You can give it Spore Cyst, that's one of the back things, and it gives you -1 to hit them. It doesn't stack with the Venom Thrope, it actually says that, but give him the -1 hit no matter where he is. Or you can give him Tusks, and that when he charges, he gets +1 attacks. And yeah, those are the main ones right there. And then his Living Battering Ram, just like Old One Eye, they gain the ability to get +1 to their hit rolls when they charge. The fact that they're 4+ weapon skill, put Old One Eye near them, make them 3+, and then when they charge, they become 2+. That's huge. Like, Carnifexes are awesome, and they're super cheap. You want a Carnifex that has a 3+ weapon skill and those 4 Devours? 105 points. An 8 wound model that can put out 24 strength 6 shots at 3+ ballistic skill, and it can move 7 inches and get in a position to do that. It's ridiculous. It is awesome. He loses all his close combat abilities, which is a pretty big deal because he goes from strength 6, like just a siding talent, strength 6 -3 AP and D3 damage, re-rolling 1s, to strength 6, no AP and 1 damage, no re-rolls. Pretty useless at that point. But you just don't work on him getting into close combat, or you just kind of keep him bubble wrapped by Termagants or something. The Screamer Killer is like, it's like a callback to that original Carnifex model that had the 4 siding talons and was like screaming something. Essentially, one of the upgrades you can get of Carnifex is Bioplasma, which is a 12-inch plasma shot. It's like D3 shot, strength 7, -3 AP, 1 damage. Well, the Screamer Killers have Bioplasmic Scream, which is D6 shots instead of D3, 18-inch range instead of 12, and it's -4 AP instead of -3, still strength 7. And they have, but the only thing they can have is 2 pairs of monster sided talons. Although you can add Toxin Sacs, Adrenal Glands, and the Spore Cyst, the whole -1 to hit thing. So they're kind of the semi-close combat ones, but they do have the Terrifying ability, which is everybody within 8 inches. Your opponent, all enemies within 8 inches get -1 to their leadership, essentially. It says add 1 to any morale tests. I guess there's a distinction there. So he gets nearby, and he's just making things break. Now, that's pretty cool. I want to try out the Screamer Killers. And then there's the Thornbacks. They automatically have the Chitin Thorns upgrade. And they're limited on their weapons. They seem to be more a shooting one because they automatically have enhanced senses. Oh, sorry, no, they can take enhanced senses or spine banks. Sorry, and spine banks and or thresher scythe. The spine banks, I didn't mention it with the other Carnifex. Basically, it's just another shooting attack, 6-inch range, 4 shot, strength 5, and it can be fired when you're in combat, so kind of like pistols. Now the Thornback is limited. He comes by default with 2 Devours and a pair of monster siding talons. but he can replace his Scything Talons with a Stranglethorn cannon, and he could replace his Devours with Death Spitters. So it seems to be more of a shooting Carnifex, which is interesting. And the Thorned Battering Ram, he basically, instead of the Carnifex, when the Carnifex charges on a 4+, he does 1 mortal wound to an enemy unit within an inch. But when a Thornback charges, they suffer mortal wound, but infantry units instead suffer D3 mortal wounds. So he's meant to just charge into infantry. So he's kind of a shooter, but at the same time, it's interesting to see how these are going to work, because I'd love to have that ability, but have Scything Talons, Crushing Claws, or double Scything Talons to get the +1 attack. Because that's what the Screamer Killers will get. They'll get the extra attack because they have 2 sets of monster Scything Talons instead of 1. So really neat changes there. It is the age of the Carnifex, which is funny because I got 9 Carnifexes magnetized fully for all their arms because the heads and the backs didn't matter. And now I have to go and get 9 or 12 or 15 more magnetized for their heads and their backs and their weapons. So the tails used to have different things too. Have they changed the tails? I didn't actually look to see if you could switch out their tails. Because there used to be like the Thresher ones, there's actually different ones that are meant to be a little more like threshing, one that's like a bone mace. But, oh, yep, it is. You have the option for the tail, too. So I'll have to get that magnetized, too. You can swap out the Thresher Scythe for a Bone Mace. The Thresher Scythe gets more attacks, but the Bone Mace is higher strength, essentially, just how you would expect it. Molochs haven't changed. They still suck. I know some people claim they don't, but I think they suck. Trigons and Trigon Primes have not changed. They're cool. They're decent. Tyrannocytes haven't really changed. The Harpies are interesting, and the Hive Crones. Their main changes are that they've become flyers instead of fast attack, which makes total sense, but they've lost their minimum movement, which doesn't make sense. So, yeah, when I say flyers, I mean like the force organization chart. They've become flyers. So no minimum movement anymore. So they're just move 30 and then 20 and then 10 as they get injured. So yeah, you're not stuck going a certain distance. You can just move up to 30. I wonder if that's a misprint. We'll find out in an FAQ and errata. Other than that, they're the same, except that, of course, the heavy Venom Cannons have changed and gotten better. And the Sporocysts haven't changed, except that their Psychic Resonator, it was before that if they're within 8 inches of a Synapse, then they became Synapse. Now if they're within 12 inches of a Synapse, they become Synapse. So minor change there, but it does extend the Synapse range quite well. Weapon-wise, the only things I really saw change were the heavy Venom Cannons, and the Devours, which we already talked about. Whew! All right. So now let's talk about the Hive Fleet adaptations. So basically, just like a lot of the other books that have been coming out, if your detachment consists of only Tyranids and they're all from the same Hive Fleet, and it could be a splinter fleet, so you can see like, yeah, they're Behemoth, but they're actually like my own thing, Chromunder, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but they're actually Behemoth, then you get that army-wide benefit. So all units in the Tyranid detachment gain a Hive Fleet adaptation, so it's not just infantry or something like that. And splinter fleets just count as being that. So Behemoth, for example, gets hyper aggression. They can reroll failed charge rolls. That's it. Their whole army reroll failed charge rolls. I can't wait to do Behemoth one. The first game that you're going to see against Quirk that I just did is a shooting army, because I've been doing a lot of beat map bat reps with Tyranids, and they've been mostly focused on close combat because I love it, and because the Tyranids could do shooting, but they were really good at close combat, and I love that part of the game. So I figured I should do something different, so it's more a shooting list, which is why I brought Kronos, which we'll talk about in a second. But Behemoth rerolling charge rolls, oh, that is ridiculously good. Kraken has questing tendrils. When a unit with this adaptation advances, you roll 3 dice instead of 1 and pick the highest. And in addition, it can fall back and charge. That's pretty cool too. That actually almost ties it with Behemoth. If I was doing a Genestealer only army, I would really consider Kraken instead of Behemoth, because being able to fall back from a fight that I no longer want, like, oh, you charged your big vehicle into my Genestealers, so they're going to take forever to kill that, so let's fall back and charge that thing instead. And also, they can advance and charge, and so really be able to get the rolling 3 dice to have that really good chance of getting a 6 or at least a 5. I know you could get less than that, but you have a really good chance of rolling really high because of that. So also very good at close combat. Leviathan Synaptic Imperative. If you're within 6 inches of a Synapse unit, you ignore damage on 6+. So a 6+ Feel No Pain kind of thing. Unless you have Catalyst, it says then that supersedes it. So that's pretty awesome. If you bring lots of Synapse, all of a sudden you have an army-wide 6+ ignoring damage. Pretty nasty. Gorgon, Adaptive Toxins. You can reroll wound rolls of 1 in the fight phase for units with this adaptation. See, that would also compete for my close combat army. Oh, I want to be Behemoth, Kraken, and Gorgon all mixed together. Can't those 3 Hive Fleets like fight each other and consume and become one? Super awesome. Gorgon Lithon. I don't know, something like that. There's Jormungandr Tunnel Networks. A unit with this adaptation, other than units that can fly, always has the benefit of cover for the purposes of shooting attacks. That's a big deal. If the unit advances or charges, however, it loses the benefit until the start of your next movement phase. But that's a pretty big deal. If you move or don't move, as long as you don't advance or charge, you get +1 armor. That's kind of nasty. Not kind of, that's really nasty. That's awesome. Hydra, swarming insects. You can reroll hit rolls in the fight phase for units with this adaptation that target units containing fewer models than their own. Kind of reminds me of the Sons of Horus. They have rules that they like to kind of gang up and they get bonuses against units that are smaller. So if you swarm in, so basically that one encourages swarming, so lots of Gene Stealers in a group rather than your min squads of 5, lots of Hormagaunts, all of a sudden rerolling 1s. Reroll hit rolls altogether, so a total reroll of hit rolls. So Gene Stealers would love that. If you bring in Gene Stealers and make sure they're a nice big meaty 15 to 20 group, then most likely you're running in there. And you can be like, screw Scything Talons, I'll use my Rending Claws, because Scything Talons let me reroll 1s, but this lets me reroll everything. So once again, competing for what I want to try for my close combat armies. And Kronos is Bio Barrage. You can reroll hit rolls of 1 for units with this adaptation in your shooting phase if they did not move. That one is what I use in my battle report, and I can just say that it's cool, but I don't like to not move. But if you're the kind of person who likes to set up a lot of artillery and not move them, Kronos is going to be awesome for you. And on top of that, unfortunately, all troops in a Battleforged Tyranid detachment do gain extensions of the hive mind, which is just basically objective secured. Which I don't like. I kind of was excited when the Space Marine Codex came out first and Space Marines got it. I'm like, oh cool, that can be their thing because they're elite. But now they're just basically all troops in Battleforged detachments are getting that, so not a big fan. Jumping into the stratagems, which can also affect which of the hive fleets you choose, because there's some hive fleet only stratagems. There's a lot of good ones here. I can't possibly read them all to you, and so I'm going to try to pick out some really interesting ones. The first one that I think that's actually first on the page and probably the most interesting is Psychic Barrage. Basically, it takes 3 units of zone tropes that have at least 3 zone tropes in them, and you choose one of them, and it has to have 2 units of 3 zone tropes, minimum 3, within 6 inches. They can't cast any psychic powers for that turn, which kind of sucks, but for 1 command point, they choose a point that's an 18-inch range of all 3 units, and then it is a 3-inch bubble around that point that on a 4, you roll a die for each unit within 3 inches, and on a 4+, that unit takes 3d3 mortal wounds. Characters, you have to hit them on a 5, and you hit them on a 3+ if it's a unit that has 10 or more models. That is nasty and devastating. The hard thing about that one, though, is that I often, in the game that you'll see, I bring 4 zone tropes, and 4 zone tropes can cast 2 psychic powers, and their smite is 24-inch and can do d3 plus d3, so you're already doing 2d3 per smite. So it's 2d3, 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 so you're doing a total of 6d3, assuming you get it off. Whereas this one, you choose a spot, and you have to roll a 4+ to hit them, and then that does 4d3. So if there's a lot of units around, I think it'll be very powerful. But then you can't cast a second psychic power like Catalyst or the Horror or these other ones that are really useful. But the really cool thing about Psychic Barrage is it's not a psychic test, so it cannot be denied. So that's a huge advantage. I haven't used it yet. You won't see it in the battle report, but I think it will be very powerful. There's a lot of other really cool ones like Caustic Blood. You select a Tyranid unit from your army at the start of the fight phase, and whenever a model from that unit is destroyed, you roll a die, and if you roll a 6, the enemy unit that inflicted that wound takes a mortal wound. So imagine 20 Termagants, 4-point models. You charge them in, and at the start of the fight phase, you know they're about to get mauled by a bunch of close combat specialists. And so you're like, you know what, 1 command point, they all have Caustic Blood. And so then they kill like 10 or 15 of them. Let's say they kill 12 of them. You roll then 12 dice, every 6 will give a mortal wound. Now on 12, there's 2 on average, but if you've played this game long enough, you know if you're rolling 12 dice looking for 6s and you're the opponent, you know you're terrified, because that could easily be 3 or 4 mortal wounds on your squad. And that's just from these 4-point units. You could theoretically put it on a large Carnifex too, but it doesn't seem like it'd be worth a command point. You can regenerate wounds on a Tyranid model for 2 command points to get D3 wounds back. You can give Scorch Bugs. I think this one's cool. For 1 command point, you choose a Tyranid unit with Flesh Borers or Flesh Borer Hive. That's the one from the Tyrannifex. That is, I'm going to get the number of shots wrong. I want to say it's 20 shots. Flesh Borer Hive is 20 shots, strength 5. And you get to add 1 to all wound rolls for that shooting phase. So imagine strength 5 getting +1 to its wound rolls. Like, that's pretty awesome. That's hurting Land Raiders on a 4+. And yeah, 1 command point for that. So you can have a big unit of Termagants, like 30 of them, all firing their strength 4 weapons, and they get +1 to their wound rolls. And if there's at least 20 of them, they get to reroll 1s. That is nasty, and it's scary. And there's more. You can have the feeder tendrils, where if a gene stealer, lictor, toxic green, or venom throw kills a character, spend a command point to regain D3 command points. So it's not really a gamble because minimum is 1, but you don't know if you'll actually get more. And it has the same thing with relics, that you can spend a command point to bring an extra relic, or 3 command points to bring 2 extra relics. There is one that at first I thought was really good. 1 command point for metabolic overdrive. You choose a unit at the end of your movement phase after everybody's moved. Oh no, sorry. After a unit moves, you can spend a command point and have them make a second move, including advances. Sounds like the Swarmlord's ability, but they can't shoot and they can't charge if they do that. Even if you throw Onslaught on them, it's not going to help, because this one specifically forbids charging and shooting. So it'll be helpful to get something somewhere, but it won't be able to do anything after that. So at first when I was reading that, I'm like, oh, now we bring the Swarmlord and you use this, and you can send 2 things forward, but really only one of them will be able to charge. And you have ones that let you shoot a Tyranid infantry unit a second time. That's 2 command points to do so. You can change morale tests with Ripper Swarms and Haruspexes. You can, oh, here's a cool one, Pathogenic Slime for 2 command points. You choose a monster in the shooting phase, and he gets +1 to all of his damage. So imagine a 24-shot strength 6, 2 damage Carnifex hitting on 3s, or a Exocrine, whose damage goes from 2 to 3 on all his strengths, on his 12 strength 7 -3 AP plasma shots. That's scary, depending on what you're shooting at, of course. If you're shooting at Primaris Marines, then going from damage 2 to 3 is not a big deal, but going from damage 1 to 2 is enormous, absolutely enormous. That means every 3+ save they fail, it's gone. Or if you're trying to take down a vehicle, it's huge. It's 2 command points, it's really good. Now there's a few in here that I don't know how you're supposed to play this. For 3 command points, there's Spore Field, that after you deploy, you can add up to 2 units of Spore Mines to your army as reinforcements. There's another one that lets you add, to bring back a unit of Termagants, Hormagaunts, or Gargoyles, and there's another one that lets you bring in more Gene Stealers. I think that's all of them. The question is, do you have to pay the points cost for this? Now, the immediate answer, if rules is written, is yes. Anytime you bring in new units, you have to pay points cost. But these are all costing 3 command points. I'm wondering if their intent was that you pay 3 command points and actually get more guys in your army. I don't know. I'm not going to play it that way unless an errata or an FAQ comes out. But if I have to pay the points and I have to pay 3 command points to bring them on, I am never, ever, ever going to do that. Bring 3 command points for 2 units of Spore Mines. Like, I know I can bring more Spore Mines in those units now. Like 9, I can bring 9 Spore Mines instead of just 6. But 3 command points? No. Those things are super awesome and super valuable. And to use them to bring Spore Mines in where I also have to pay the points cost for them, I don't think so. I could have just paid the points cost for the Spore Mines, and yeah, it's just, I know they can't be deployed anywhere on the battlefield more than 12 inches from the enemy models, but, or maybe they can, I don't remember. But yeah, it just doesn't seem to be worthwhile. There's other ones for lictors, and a Psyker can cast another power, which it's not as useful as it sounds, because you can't cast the same power more than once, so you've probably already done Smite. Now there's some specific one like Jormungandr, which likes the tunnels. You can actually set up a unit of Raveners, a Moloch, Trigon, or Trigon Prime. You can also set up units within tunnels with them. So it's not just Trigons that can bring guys out of tunnels, it's Molochs and Raveners too. Behemoth gets a 1 command point stratagem. If you complete a charge move, roll a die for each model in the charging unit that's within an inch. On a roll of 6+ or 2+ for monsters, inflict a mortal wound. So imagine 20 Hormagaunts going in and like 12 of them manage to get within an inch. You say, you know what, 1 command point, let's do some brute force. They're just hurling themselves at you. I'd roll 12 dice and every 6 causes a mortal wound. That's pretty cool. And if it's a monster, you could use the command point to get a 2+ chance to do a mortal wound. There might be certain clutch moments where that'll be huge. And a Carnifex going in will also on a 4+ do his own mortal wound as well. Or a Thornback or Old One-Eye doing D3 potentially. Leviathans have their stratagem that basically select an enemy unit that is within an inch of a Leviathan unit from your army that can fly, and also within an inch of one that cannot. You can reroll hit and wound rolls of 1 in this phase for attacks for any Leviathan units that target that enemy. So it's like there's a guy right here and a guy right next to him, and they both kind of spot him, and they're going to work together to kill him. Now obviously you can't really shoot at him because he's locked in combat, but you get to reroll hit and wound rolls of 1. So there's going to be very specific moments, like a Hive Tyrant with close combat weapons, and then on the ground there's a Carnifex with close combat weapons, and you're up against Gilliman or some Land Raider, and all of a sudden they're like, you know what, 1 command point, we're killing this thing. And yeah, those are the different. Then Kronos has theirs. Chronos is kind of an anti-psyker as well, that for a command point, when an enemy psyker says, you know, I'm going to manifest a power, if they're within 24 inches of any Chronos Tyranid unit, not just psychers, you can spend a command point and say, now you only get to roll 1 die. So you can shut down one of their psychic attempts, and that could be a pretty big deal. Gorgon has one that you use in the fight phase on something that has toxin sacs. For the duration of the phase, the toxin sacs biomorph causes 1 additional damage on wound rolls of 5+, rather than 6+. Normally, toxin sacs, basically, if you wound on a 6+, you do an extra damage. Well, these ones will be on a 5+. And Kraken has opportunistic advance. If you, in your movement phase, when you roll the dice for an advancing Kraken unit other than one with fly, you can double the number you roll. So once again, that makes me want to bring Kraken for Gene Stealers, because I'll move 8 plus double my d6, and they can still charge. Digestive Denial is a kind of a weird one. Before the first battle round begins, choose a piece of terrain other than a fortification. You don't get cover in that piece of terrain. So that there might be some moments. That's 2 command points, though, so it's like, how often will that come up? I'm not quite sure. So that's basically the stratagems. I skipped over a few, but I hit on, I think, the most important ones. The Hive Mind discipline, as it's expanded, like all of the other psychic disciplines, it still has the original 3, Catalyst, the Horror, and Onslaught. Added in Dominion, which is Warp Charge 5. You can select a friendly unit within 36 inches, and it ignores instinctive behavior and automatically passes morale tests. So basically he's reaching out and putting Dominion on a unit that's really far away and saying, no, you will not run, and you're not going to have instinctive behavior. There's Paroxysm that forces a unit to fight last. That's okay. It's only Warp Charge 5, so it's easy to get off. Psychic Scream, I think, is really neat. It's basically another smite. It's an 18-inch hitting the nearest thing with an 18, nearest enemy with an 18. Does not have to be visible. Does D3 mortal wounds. But here's the cool thing: if that was a psyker, you roll 2 dice, and if you roll higher than their leadership, they forget a random psychic power, and they no longer can use that psychic power for the rest of the game. But just the fact that it's an 18-inch D3 mortal wounds. Now, Zone Thropes won't get the benefit of being able to add on the mortal wounds because it's not smite. But just like, hey, I'm at 18-inch range of you, so I'm going to smite you, D3 plus D3, or D6 plus D3. And then I am going to Psychic Scream you, because Zone Thropes with at least 4 guys can cast a second power. And that one also does D3 more mortal wounds. Now, in match play, of course, you'll only be able to cast that once. You're not going to be able to spam it like Smite. But I still think that gives you that much more utility for that as well. So Psychic Powers, definitely interesting. We have our new bio artifacts of the Tyranids. Brings back a lot of things that they used to have in their older books as well. There are specific ones for each of the high fleets, and then there's some generic ones as well. Once again, has the same rules and restrictions that you can only give them to characters. And named characters such as Swarmlord, Old One-Eye, Death Leaper, and Red Terror cannot be given any. So they are considered named characters for that sense. And they do usually replace one of the model's existing weapons, so you have to pay for that existing weapon. Otherwise, the bio artifact is free. So, for example, a Behemoth model can replace his monster scything talons with the size of Tyran, which is still just melee, but it's now strength +1, AP -3, and damage 3. So it's an extra strength. And he gets to make an additional attack with this weapon each time it fights. In addition, each time you make a hit roll of 6+, you can make an additional hit roll, but that does not generate more. So essentially, it gets an extra strength, you get an extra attack, and if you roll a 6+ when you're attacking with the weapon, you'll get another attack. And you're typically going to have, let's think of some characters that could have monster scything talons. That would basically be the Hive Tyrant. Does a Turvagon have massive or monstrous? Because it's only monster scything talons that count there. So Hive Tyrants have monster scything talons. The Turvagon has massive scything talons, so he won't be able to take it. So it's basically a Hive Tyrant would have that. Old One-Eye has monsters too, but he's a character, he's a named character, so he can't take it. So basically, a Hive Tyrant could take one of these, makes an extra attack, extra strength, and can generate more attacks. Pretty nasty. The Yumgarl factors back. That it mentions Yumgarl Gene Stealers, but you can only give it to a Tyranid character. But yet, their little fluff here, they talk about Yumgarl Gene Stealers. Essentially, it's not that useful. It's a random thing. At the start of each fight phase, you roll a D3, and you either get +1 strength, +1 attack, or +1 toughness. So it'd be kind of cool on a Broodlord, I guess, if it matches. You could put it on a Hive Tyrant, or you could put it on a Neurothrope or something like that, but I'm not sure why you would. The Reaper of Obliterax is back. It's a Lash Whip and Bone Sword, or Lash Whip and Monstrous Bone Sword, so Tyranid Prime can take this one. Basically, all it does is on a wound roll of 6+, this weapon inflicts double damage. Before, it would be instant death Now it's double damage, so it's pretty cool. Kraken models can take the chameleonic mutation, where you get -1 to all hit rolls for ranged weapons that target this model. Gorgon models can take hyper-adaptive biology. From the end of the first phase in which this model suffers any wounds, he gets +1 toughness for the remainder of the battle. So that can be pretty cool. Leviathan can take Slayer Sabers, which replace monstrous bone swords only. And so that would be on a Hive Tyrant as well. That it is AP -2, damage 3, but you can make 1 additional attack with them, which bone swords already do. But if an infantry or biker model suffers damage from this weapon but isn't slain, you roll a D3, and if it's greater than its remaining wounds, it is slain. So, kind of interesting. Hydras can replace their 2 Death Spitters with Slimer Maggots with a Slimer Maggot infestation, which Slimer Maggots are Assault 6, or sorry, yeah, it replaces 2 Death Spitters with this. So he gets the same number of attacks, same strength, same AP, except he can reroll failed wound rolls for this weapon. So not bad if you have something that could use that. Chronos models can replace their Stranglethorn Cannon with a Balethorn Cannon. And that's the same as a Stranglethorn Cannon, except it does 2 damage, and you can't take invulnerable saves against it. So it'll be situational, because it's only D6 shots, but it could be interesting. And then Jormungandr monsters can take Infrasonic Roar, and that's enemy units within 6 inches gets -1 to their leadership. So that could be interesting to stack that with the Thornbacks. And not that the Thornbacks could take that, but stack it, put it on a character who's near a Thornback. No, sorry, not. The Screamer Killer, which gives them +1 to their morale test. This one gives them -1 leadership, so that's essentially 2 extra guys that'll run. Then you got some interesting ones like the Norn Crown. It basically extends the ignoring instinctive behavior from 24 to 30. So cool. As you'll see in the next video, I stuck that on my Neurothrope, because why not? I needed something. I didn't have anything else to really bring. The Maw Claws of Thyrax replace Rending Claws or Monstrous Rending Claws, so most likely would be put on a Broodlord. When he slays an enemy model in the fight phase, you can reroll failed hit rolls in all subsequent fight phase for this model. Pretty awesome. The Miasmic Cannon replaces a Heavy Venom Cannon. It has the same profile as one, except it basically automatically hits targets within 8 inches, because the old Miasmic Cannon was a flamer or a small blast at large range. So it automatically hits at close range and always wounds on a 2+, unless it's a vehicle. Then it's strength 9, so it'll be probably wounded on a 3+, most likely. So some interesting things in there. Nothing in my mind is like overwhelmingly like, yes, always that. But maybe the tournament meta will find something really interesting. And then we have our Warlord traits. And then we'll talk, the points, I'll tell you right now, the points haven't changed much. So I'm not actually going to go through all the points cost changes. You can look at those if you'd like to. And we have our tactical objectives as well, which I'm not really going to go over because I never find them to be super interesting. But they are there, and they will affect your Maelstrom of War games. But Warlord traits, we have some interesting choices. Of course, we have our 6 Warlord traits, and then we have the ones that are unique to each of the Hive fleets. Now, in other codexes, it's like if you have a named character, then you have to take his chapters or regiments Warlord trait. Well, since the named characters of the Tyranids are not specific to a Hive fleet, even Old One-Eye, who should be Behemoth, but he's not, they have a Warlord trait they have to take that's from the basic ones. Like the Swarmlord has to take Alien Cunning, which lets him redeploy after you're done deploying. The Old One-Eye takes Adaptive Biology, which after the first phase in which this Warlord suffers any wounds, the remainder of the battle, you get -1 to damage, minimum 1, on any weapons against him, so it makes him even that much more survivable. But it's after the phase is over, so if people keep shooting at him, they can try to kill him before that goes into effect. Death Leaper gets Mind Eater. If he slays an enemy character, choose a friendly Tyranid unit within 3 inches. That unit can then move and advance as if it was your movement phase. So that's in the fight phase that he does that, so he kind of sends off somebody else, or himself if he wants to. And then with a Red Terror gets Heightened Senses. He never suffers any penalties to his hit rolls, except for Overwatch, he only hits on 6s. That's a cool one, Heightened Senses. So you give it to a Hive Tyrant, and you give him those 24 shots from the assault weapons. He could advance and still fire them at full ballistic skill at something that's giving him -1 to hit at ranged. And that's a big difference. It gives him a lot more variety there. Instinctive Killer is another Warlord trait. Before the game begins, but after deployment, before the first turn essentially, your Warlord chooses a unit, and all units like that one, so if I say Tactical Marines and all Tactical Marines, you get to reroll failed hits against. So that's pretty cool. And then the other one was Synaptic Linchpin, which is just +6 inches to his Synapse ability. Then we have the specific Warlord traits. For Behemoth, It is, if you make a wound roll of 6+ in the fight phase, it does 1 additional damage. So essentially it's toxin sacks. So I guess you could stack it with toxin sacks and make it +2 damage, which is interesting. Kraken. In each fight phase, you can pick 1 friendly Kraken unit within 6 inches. He gets to fight first, even if he didn't charge. That's a pretty big deal. Leviathan. Once per battle round, you can reroll a single hit roll, wound roll, damage roll, advanced roll, charge roll, or saving throw made for your warlord. Cool. Not like game-changing, or maybe it would be. Gorgon, at the end of the fight phase, roll a d6 for each enemy unit within an inch of the warlord. On a 4+, they take a mortal wound. So he's got this lethal miasma is what it's called. So he's just eking all this yuckiness. And so everybody within an inch, enemies, on a 4+ takes a mortal wound. That can be a pretty big deal. Jormungandr, insidious threat. Enemy units never gain any bonus to their saving throws for being in cover for attacks made by the warlord or friendly units within 3 inches. So he's got a 3-inch bubble of ignore cover, essentially. Hydra, at the beginning of each of your turns, roll a die for each wound that your warlord has lost. For each roll of 6, he regains a wound lost earlier in the battle. A cool little regeneration there. And Kronos Soul Hunger. Whenever an enemy psyker fails a psychic test within 18 inches of your warlord, they suffer D3 mortal wounds. But your warlord is a synapse creature, and they're going to get -1. So that, I think, is a really cool one. It makes Kronos that much more interesting. But, yeah, so that's pretty neat. Whew, we talked about a lot of things here. Overall, I'm very happy with the changes. Even in the places where I'm not like super excited, like the relics, the bio artifacts, they're still cool. They add some flavor. The warlord traits are cool. I think there's going to be some interesting combos people are going to come up with. What combos do you think you would want to try with a Tyranid army? Which ones should I try in my future battle reports? And make sure you go ahead and click the link below to go and watch the Tyranid versus Ultramarine battle report of me versus Quirk, so you can see High Fleet Kronos as a shooting army in action. Go ahead, check that out, and I will see you in the next video.